A millionaire arrives unexpectedly at lunchtime and cannot believe his eyes when he sees the three identical 7-year-old boys of the housekeeper having lunch at his table. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The Wednesday afternoon after Ash Wednesday in New York was stuffy, with that humid heat lingering after days of festivities. Robert Anderson drove his BMW through the streets, still adorned with remnants of confetti stuck to the wet asphalt, feeling the weight of routine returning to his broad shoulders. At 42, he was known in business circles as the Iron Hurricane, a man who transformed failing companies into profitable empires without showing a hint of sentimentality. His mansion on the Upper East Side, with its high walls and immaculate gardens, was the perfect reflection of his personality. Imposing, organized, and completely isolated from the outside world. As he crossed the electronic gate of his property, Robert noticed something different in the air. There was a smell of home-cooked food that he didn't recognize. Not the sophisticated dishes his private chef usually prepared, but something simpler, more familiar. He frowned as he handed the car keys to the doorman, a middle-aged man who had worked for him for 5 years without ever knowing his full name. "Good afternoon, Mr. Robert," murmured the doorman, avoiding eye contact as he always did. "Ms. Johnson is in the kitchen." Robert nodded dryly and walked through the marble entrance, his Italian shoes echoing in the hall, decorated with artworks he had purchased more for their investment value than for aesthetic appreciation. The mansion had 3 floors, 8 bedrooms, a large swimming pool, and a garden that could host a party for 300 people, but he only knew the essential rooms. His office, the master bedroom, the dining room, and the gourmet kitchen where he had his espresso every morning before heading out to conquer the business world. As he approached the dining room, the sound of children's laughter made him stop in the hallway. Laughter? In his house? That was impossible. Robert didn't host families. He had no godchildren, and he had no contact with children whatsoever. His social life was limited to business dinners at expensive restaurants and charity events where he appeared out of social obligation. He cautiously pushed open the frosted glass door that separated the hallway from the dining room, and was met with a scene that left him completely speechless. There, sitting at his imported Indonesian mahogany table, the same table where he had signed million-dollar contracts, were 3 identical boys, appearing to be about 7 years old. They were eating heartily from a platter of baked beans, using his fine china as if it were common family dinnerware. "Mum, can I have seconds?" asked one of the boys, raising his empty plate with a wide smile that revealed a missing baby tooth. "Of course, my love, but eat slowly," replied a feminine voice that Robert recognized as Ms. Johnson, his housekeeper. Ms. Johnson appeared from the kitchen carrying a cast-iron pot, wearing her immaculate white apron, but Robert noticed her hands were trembling slightly. She was a woman of about 35, always very discreet and efficient. She had worked for him for 2 years, and he knew very little about her personal life, just as he preferred it to be with all his employees. "Mr. Robert!" Miss Johnson nearly dropped the pot when she saw him standing in the doorway. Her brown eyes widened in shock, and she quickly set the pot down on the table, wiping her hands on her apron. I didn't expect you so soon. Let me explain." The 3 boys stopped eating and looked at Robert with childlike curiosity. They had dark brown curly hair, tanned skin, and large expressive eyes. There was something unsettling about the way they looked at him, not with fear, as most adults did, but with genuine, innocent curiosity. "Hi," said the same boy who had asked for seconds. "Do you live here? This house is really big. How many bedrooms does it have?" Robert was at a loss for words. No one had ever asked him such direct and unpretentious questions. In his world, people measured every word before addressing him, calculating possible consequences and benefits. "Tommy, don't bother the gentleman," Miss Johnson gently scolded, but there was affection in her voice. "Boys, Finish your meal quickly." "They are—" Robert finally found his voice, but it came out raspier than he intended. "They are my children, sir." Miss Johnson stepped forward, clearly nervous. "Triplets. The daycare was closed for the holiday, and I had no one to leave them with. My neighbor, who usually takes care of them, traveled out of town. No, I shouldn't have brought them here, but I couldn't miss work and—" "Triplets," Robert repeated the word, as if it had a strange taste in his mouth. He observed the three boys more closely. Despite being identical, he noticed small differences. One had a small scar on his forehead, another was slightly taller, and the third, the one who had spoken to him, seemed to be the most outgoing. "Yes, sir. Peter, Paul, and Danny." Ms. Johnson pointed to each one as she spoke their names. "They've been very well behaved, I promise. We've already finished lunch, and I will take them home right now." Robert continued to watch the boys in silence. There was something familiar in their gestures, in the delicate way they held their forks, in the way they tilted their heads slightly to the right when they thought. Peter, or maybe it was Paul, had managed to eat the baked beans without spilling a single grain on the plate, showing impressive motor coordination for a child his age. "Mommy, is he your boss?" asked Danny, the most outgoing. "He looks important." Was Daddy important too? The innocent question made Ms. Johnson visibly impale. She quickly moved closer to the boys and began to gather the dishes. "Boys, it's time to go. Mr. Robert needs to work." "Dad?" Robert repeated the word, feeling something strange stir in his chest. "They don't have a dad?" "No, sir," Miss Johnson replied without looking at him, too busy setting the table. "It's just the four of us. It's always been that way." Robert observed the scene with an attention he usually reserved for market analyses. He noticed how Miss Johnson kissed each boy on the forehead before wiping their faces with a napkin, how they automatically helped stack the plates without her asking, how there was a natural harmony among the four that he had never witnessed in his own family. "You don't have to leave right away," he said, surprising himself. "Finish eating." Miss Johnson looked at him in shock, as if he had spoken in another language. "Are you sure, sir? I know you don't like to—" "It's fine," Robert cut in, still trying to understand why he had said that. "Once won't hurt anyone." The boys smiled simultaneously, a synchronicity that intrigued him even more. At that moment, under the golden afternoon light, streaming through the large dining room windows, Robert Anderson, the man who controlled millions of dollars and hundreds of employees, felt he had stumbled upon something much larger and more complex than any business deal he had ever closed in his life. The 2 weeks that followed that unexpected encounter brought a restlessness that Robert had never experienced before. No matter how hard he tried to focus on his meetings in his Wall Street office, his mind constantly returned to that afternoon when he had found 3 little strangers eating at his table. There was something about those boys that bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't irritation, as he would have expected to feel, but a persistent curiosity that grew with each passing day. "Mr. Anderson, the Japanese are on line 2, announced his secretary Carla through the intercom. She was an efficient 50-year-old woman who had worked for him for a decade and knew his moods better than any psychologist. Robert stood before the panoramic window of his office on the 30th floor, watching the frenetic movement of Fifth Avenue below. Normally, that view of the city he had helped shape calmed him, reminding him of his power and influence. But today, even the skyline of New York couldn't soothe his restless mind. "Tell them I'll call back in 5 minutes, he replied, not turning from the window. "Sir, they've been waiting for 15 minutes. It's about the merger of the—" "5 minutes, Carla." He heard his secretary's frustrated sigh before the intercom clicked off. Robert knew he was acting strangely, but he couldn't help it. For the first time in his professional life, Something personal was interfering with his business, and that scared him more than any financial crisis. That afternoon, he arrived home earlier than usual. He typically returned at 9 in the evening after having dinner alone at a nearby restaurant, but it was only 7:30 when he parked in the garage of his mansion. Miss Johnson seemed surprised to see him. "Good evening, Mr. Robert. I've already prepared your dinner. It's in the oven. Warm," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel as she headed for the back exit. "Miss Johnson," Robert called before she reached the door. How are your children?" The question clearly caught her off guard. She stopped in the middle of the hallway and turned slowly, her eyes showing a mix of confusion and caution. "They're fine, sir. Thank you for asking." Her voice was formal, but Robert detected a note of tenderness when she spoke about the boys. "Peter has gotten better from the cough he had last week." "Peter is the one with the scar on his forehead?" Miss Johnson blinked in surprise. "No, sir. That's Paul. Peter is the quietest of the three. Danny is the most talkative." Robert nodded, storing that information without understanding why it was important to him. After Miss Johnson left, he wandered through the large, silent house, his footsteps echoing on the marble corridors. He stopped in the dining room and looked at the table where the boys had eaten 2 weeks ago. Everything was impeccably clean and organized as always, but he could perfectly visualize the 3 little ones sitting there, laughing and talking. It was then that he noticed something that almost went unnoticed, a folded piece of paper that had slipped under the crystal sideboard. Robert bent down and picked up the paper, carefully unfolding it. It was a drawing made with crayons, clearly the work of a child. Figure showed a large house with many windows, and in front were 4 people, a tall man in a suit, a woman in an apron, and 3 small children holding hands. Robert's heart raced for no apparent reason. The man in the drawing had dark hair and wore a navy blue suit, exactly like the one he would wear the next day. There was something unsettling about the precision of those childish strokes, the way the artist had captured details that a child shouldn't notice. "What nonsense," he murmured to himself, but he couldn't bring himself to throw the drawing away. Instead, he tucked it away in the drawer of his desk, alongside important business documents. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual and decided to have coffee in the kitchen instead of his office. Miss Johnson was preparing cinnamon rolls when he appeared, and she nearly dropped the baking pan in shock. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you were coming down here. I'll make your espresso right away." "Don't worry." Robert pulled out a chair from the small table where the staff usually had their meals. "I can have regular coffee today." Miss Johnson looked at him as if he had grown a second head, but she served a cup of freshly brewed coffee, strong as New Yorkers like it. The sweet aroma of baking cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen, creating a cozy atmosphere that Robert hadn't tasted it since childhood. "Is this bread for your children?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, sir. They love to have cinnamon rolls with their coffee in the morning before school. I make them every week." She hesitated for a moment, then continued, "Actually, it was Danny who taught me the recipe. He saw it on a cooking show and kept insisting I make it." Robert almost smiled at the thought of the outgoing boy watching television and copying recipes. "Does he like to cook?" "They all do. On weekends, they help make lunch. They are very well behaved, sir. Very close-knit, too." Miss Johnson's face lit up as she spoke about her children, and Robert noticed how she seemed younger when she smiled genuinely. That weekend, Robert broke his work routine for the first time in years. Instead of going to the office on Saturday as he always did, he decided to stay home to organize some personal documents. In reality, he had a growing curiosity about the traces he might find of the children's presence. He started in the dining room, examining every corner with the meticulousness he applied to his business audits. He found almost invisible crumbs of cinnamon rolls between the sofa cushions, evidence that the children had snacked there at some point. On the bookshelf, he discovered that some volumes were slightly out of place, as if small hands had handled them carefully. What intrigued him the most was finding, behind the grand piano that decorated a corner of the room, 3 colourful plastic cups washed and discreetly stacked. Miss Johnson had obviously tried to hide any evidence of the children's presence, but some details had escaped her meticulous cleaning. Robert picked up the cups, a blue one, a red one, and a yellow one, and examined them as if they were important pieces of evidence. They were simple, the kind you buy at any department store, but they were impeccably clean and had small bite marks on the edges. He imagined the 3 boys drinking juice from those cups, perhaps arguing over who would get which color. On Monday, he arrived at the office 15 minutes late, something unprecedented in his career. Carla greeted him with a worried look. "Mr. Anderson, are you feeling okay? You never arrive late." "I'm great, Carla. Just had to take care of some domestic matters." During the board meeting that morning, Robert found himself absent-mindedly doodling in the margins of his documents. When he realized it, he had sketched 3 small figures sitting around a table. He quickly scribbled over the drawing, but the image was already etched in his mind. That afternoon, when he returned home, he decided to conduct an experiment. He deliberately left an imported chocolate on the kitchen counter in a visible spot. The next day, the chocolate had disappeared, but in its place was a small note written in neat, childish handwriting. "Thank you for the treat. It was so delicious. Peter, Paul, and Danny." Robert kept the note along with the drawing in his drawer, unknowingly creating a small file of those mysterious pieces of evidence. For the first time in his adult life, something was awakening in him, a curiosity that went beyond numbers and profits. A puzzle was forming in his own home, and he discovered that he desperately wanted to understand each piece. The first month after meeting the triplets transformed Robert into an unrecognizable version of himself. For the first time in 2 decades of corporate career, his meticulous routine began to include a completely new activity: investigating signs of the children's presence in his own home. It was as if he had developed a special radar to detect traces of the boys who, officially, were not supposed to be there. "Mr. Anderson, the quarterly report has arrived," Carla announced, entering his office with a stack of documents. "And the board confirms the meeting for Thursday at 2 in the afternoon." Robert glanced at the clock. 3:15 in the afternoon. Normally, he would be completely immersed in numbers and projections, but today his thoughts kept drifting back home. He had decided to return earlier again, varying his arrival times to try to understand the patterns of movement in his mansion. "Carla, cancel my appointments after 5 today," he said, signing some contracts without his usual attention to detail. "Sir?" The secretary raised her eyebrows. "But you have dinner with the German investors." "Reschedule for tomorrow." During the drive home, Robert reflected on how subtly his life had changed. Before, he drove on autopilot, mentally reviewing spreadsheets and market strategies. Now, he found himself thinking about domestic details: what time the children got home from school, how Ms. Johnson organized their routine, why she chose to work as a housekeeper when she clearly had enough education for other professions. Upon entering the house that afternoon, he went straight to the kitchen. Ms. Johnson was preparing what seemed to be vegetable soup, and the homey aroma contrasted with the sophisticated dishes his private chef usually left prepared. "Good afternoon, Mr. Robert," Ms. Johnson greeted him, but he noticed a tension in her voice. "I didn't expect you so early." "I finished earlier today." Robert poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching Ms. Johnson cook. "Is this soup for your children?" "Yes, sir." Paul had a bit of a cough last night, so I'm making vegetable soup with ginger. My grandmother always said that. She abruptly stopped, as if she had said more than she intended. Your grandmother? Robert encouraged her. She raised me, sir, after my parents died in an accident when I was 12. Miss Johnson stirred the soup with more force than necessary. She knew a lot about medicinal plants and home remedies. For the first time, Robert caught a glimpse of Miss Johnson's life beyond the walls of his house. He imagined an orphaned girl being raised by a grandmother, learning to care for others from a very young age. This explained her natural ability to anticipate needs and her caring yet discreet way of... He worked. And where did you live before coming to work here? Miss Johnson hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the personal questions. On the east side, sir. I still live there. Robert only knew the area by name. A working-class neighborhood far from the Upper East Side, with small houses and narrow streets. The distance between the two worlds made him realize how little he knew about the real lives of the people who worked for him. That night, Robert dined in the dining room as he always did, but this time he paid attention to the details that had previously gone unnoticed. On the china cabinet, he noticed that 3 dessert plates were slightly out of place. On the floor near the window, there were some cookie crumbs that the daily cleaning had failed to completely eliminate. After dinner, instead of heading to his office as usual, Robert decided to explore his own house. He walked through the hallways like a detective searching for clues, looking for signs of the childhood presence that Miss Johnson had been so carefully trying to hide. In the downstairs bathroom, he found a small towel folded behind the larger towels, clearly hidden there for the children's use. In the garden, he discovered some leaves pulled from the lower plants, as if small hands had examined them with scientific curiosity. There were also small sneaker marks in the damp soil, near the fountain, but it was in the library that Robert made his most intriguing discovery. Among the business books and biographies of entrepreneurs, he found a copy of The Little Prince that he didn't remember buying. The book was clearly used, with marked pages and small notes in the margins made with colored pencils. He sat in the leather armchair and opened the book. On the first page, there was a dedication written in childish handwriting. To the man of the big house, from Peter, Paul, and Danny. Below, a small drawing showed a star with a smile and outstretched arms. Robert felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. Those children, whom he barely knew, had left a gift for him. Not an expensive or elaborate gift, but something personal and meaningful. He ran his fingers over the pencil-written words, imagining 3 little heads bent over the paper, deciding together what to write. The next morning, he arrived at the office with the book in his briefcase. During a break between meetings, he found himself rereading passages that were marked in the book. One passage in particular was underlined in red pencil. One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Mr. Anderson? Carla was standing at the office door. The lawyers are here for the contract review. Robert quickly closed the book, as if he had been caught doing something forbidden. Send them in. Throughout the meeting, his mind kept returning to that underlined phrase. Who had marked that passage? Did one of the boys read that well? Or was it Miss Johnson? And why did those words seem to speak directly to him? That afternoon, he returned home determined to make more discoveries. This time, he decided to check the garage, an area he usually completely ignored. There, he found more concrete evidence, an old white Uno parked in the far corner, almost hidden behind gardening equipment. The car clearly did not belong to any of the house's regular staff. Robert examined the vehicle more closely and found in the back seat 3 small, colorful backpacks. One of them was slightly open, revealing notebooks with names written on the cover. Peter Anderson, 2nd grade B. Anderson, Robert murmured. Miss Johnson's last name was Anderson. He vaguely remembered it from her work documents. But why? Was she hiding the car so far from the main entrance? And why did the children leave their backpacks in the garage instead of taking them home? It was then that he noticed something that made him choke. On the driver's side sun visor, there was a small photo taped. The image showed Miss Johnson smiling, younger and with longer hair, hugging a man in a dark suit. The man in the photo had brown hair, average height, and a serious expression, features that Robert immediately recognized when he looked in the car's rearview mirror. With trembling hands, Robert took the photo from the visor and examined it under the dim light of the garage. It couldn't be him, or could it? The photo was slightly faded, and the man looked younger, but the resemblance was undeniable. Where and when had that photo been taken? And why did Miss Johnson keep it hidden in her car? He tucked the photo into the inner pocket of his jacket and left the garage with more questions than answers. His domestic investigation had taken a completely unexpected turn, and for the first time in his life as a successful businessman, Robert Anderson found himself facing a mystery that he could not solve with logic and determination alone. The discovery of the photo in Ms. Johnson's car disturbed Robert in a way he had never imagined possible. Throughout that night, he sat in his private office, staring at the small, faded image, trying to mentally reconstruct where and when he could have met Ms. Johnson before she became his housekeeper. The woman in the photo seemed familiar, but with a distant familiarity, like a song that one recognizes but cannot remember where it was first heard. Ms. Johnson Anderson, he repeated aloud, as if pronouncing the name could awaken some dormant memory. He called Carla at home, interrupting the secretary's dinner with an urgency she had never heard in his voice. "Carla, I need you to check the HR files of all employees who worked at the company in the last 10 years. I especially want information about a certain Ms. Anderson." "Sir, it's almost 10 at night and tomorrow is Saturday." "It's urgent, Carla. I'll pay your overtime. I need that information by Monday morning." Over the weekend, Robert behaved like a man possessed. He rummaged through his personal files, old photo albums. He even had business cards tucked away in dusty drawers. There was something in the expression of that younger Mary in the photo that deeply unsettled him, an intimacy in her smile that suggested much more than a casual professional relationship. Monday arrived with a typical fine drizzle of autumn in New York. Robert arrived at the office before 7 in the morning, an hour before Carla, and paced back and forth like a caged lion. When his secretary finally arrived, he practically threw himself at her. "Did you find anything?" Carla, still taking off her wet coat, looked at him with concern. "Mr. Anderson, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept." "The files, Carla." "Yes, I found them." She opened a file folder and pulled out some documents. Mary Smith worked at the company between 2016 and 2017. She was an administrative assistant in the finance department. She left without notice in March 2017. Robert took the papers with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. There was the admission form with a photo ID. Mary Smith, 27 years old at the time, single, address on the Upper East Side. It was her, without a doubt. Younger, with longer hair and a hopeful expression that contrasted with the cautious demeanor of the employee he knew today. "March 2017, Robert murmured. "Where was I at that time?" "Finalizing the merger with the German company. You spent 6 months in the United States, remember? That was when you took over the Chicago branch." The pieces began to fit together in Robert's mind like a macabre puzzle. 2016 and 2017 were years of intense growth for his company. He worked 16 hours a day, practically lived at the office, and his personal life consisted of corporate events and business dinners. But there was something more, a vague memory struggling to emerge from the depths of his mind. "Carla, do you remember any company parties during that time? Any social events?" "Several, sir. But there was a summer barbecue in 2016 that was especially large. You insisted on inviting all the employees, even the contractors. It was at the club's banquet hall. The summer barbecue." Robert closed his eyes and tried to remember. Fragmented images began to surface. Colourful paper lights, the smell of hot cider and popcorn, country music playing on the sound system, and there was a woman in a blue checkered dress who laughed at a joke he told, who danced with him to a slow song as the party was winding down. "My God," he whispered, abruptly opening his eyes. "Sir?" Robert did not respond. He took the photo again and examined it with renewed attention. The dress that Mary wore in the picture was exactly the same. A blue cotton dress with white details, typical of a summer barbecue, and he now remembered, with a clarity that frightened him, taking that photo with her phone, both of them smiling after a night of conversation and laughter. That afternoon, Robert cancelled all meetings and drove home with an urgency that made him run several yellow lights. He needed to confront Mary. He needed to understand why she had returned to his life so mysteriously, working in his home as if they were complete strangers. He found her in the laundry room, folding clothes with the same silent efficiency as always. When she saw him standing in the doorway, her eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Robert, I didn't hear you come in. I'll prepare your afternoon snack." "Mary," his voice came out deeper than usual. "We need to talk." She stopped folding the clothes, her hands freezing over a white shirt. "Talk about what, sir?" Robert took the photo from the inner pocket of his jacket and extended it to her. The effect was immediate and devastating. Mary paled as if she had seen a ghost. Her legs wobbled, and she had to lean against the washing machine to avoid falling. Where did you find this?" "In your car. The question is, why didn't you tell me we already knew each other?" Mary closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if preparing for a long-delayed confession. When she opened them again, there were tears glistening in the corners. "Because you wouldn't remember me," she said in an almost inaudible voice. "I was just another employee among hundreds, an administrative assistant who dared to fall in love with the boss." "Fall in love?" Robert felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "At the summer barbecue in 2016, you were so kind to me, so different from the serious and distant man I saw every day at the office. We talked all night, danced, you laughed at my silly jokes about the countryside of New York." Her tears were now flowing freely down her face. "For 3 months, I was the happiest woman in the world." Robert now remembered with painful clarity. Mary, the sweet and intelligent woman who had brightened that stressful period of his life. She made him laugh, cooked for him on weekends, patiently listened to his business worries. For the first time in his adult life, he had experienced something akin to a genuine relationship. "Why did you leave the company?" "Because I found out I was pregnant." The words came out like a whisper, but echoed in the laundry room like thunder. It was triplets, 3 babies that would change everything. Robert felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Pregnant. I tried to talk to you, but just that week I found out I was going to the United States. We scheduled a meeting for Friday. Remember, I was so nervous, so happy, thinking about how I would share the news." Robert vaguely remembered the scheduled conversation, cancelled at the last minute due to a meeting. He was in an emergency meeting with the German investors. He had promised to reschedule, but then came the trip, the new projects, life returning to its usual frantic pace. "You never reached out to me afterward." "I did, actually." Ms. Johnson smiled sadly. "I called the office dozens of times. Your secretary always said you were busy and would return the call. I went in person twice, but security wouldn't let me up. To them, I was just an ex-employee trying to bother the great Robert Anderson. And the boys. They were born premature in November 2017. Peter, Paul, and Danny. 3 little miracles that made me forget all the pain of rejection." She looked directly into his eyes for the first time since they started talking. "They sometimes ask about their father. I always tell them he's an important man, that he works a lot, and that maybe one day—" Robert couldn't finish listening. He stumbled out of the laundry room, walked down the hallway like a sleepwalker, and locked himself in his office. There, with trembling hands, he grabbed a calculator and did the math he should have done a long time ago. March 2017, minus 9 months, June 2016. Exactly the period when he had been with Ms. Johnson. The triplets who ate baked beans at his table, who left drawings around the house, who hid their backpacks in the garage. They were his children. His children who grew up without a father, raised by a mother who worked as a housekeeper to support 3 kids alone, while he amassed millions without ever suspecting he had a family in the world. The weeks that followed Ms. Johnson's revelation were the most turbulent of Robert's life. During the day, he tried to maintain the facade of a successful businessman. But at night, he found himself wandering the empty hallways of his mansion, processing the magnitude of what he had discovered. He had 3 children, 3 7-year-olds who grew up without knowing him, who played in his house without realizing he was their biological father. The first thing he did was discreetly hire a private investigator to confirm the facts. Not that he doubted Ms. Johnson's word, her painful sincerity had been undeniable. But his business mind demanded concrete evidence before making any decisions. The investigator, a discreet man recommended by his lawyers, delivered the complete report in a week. Ms. Johnson, 35 years old, single mother of triplets born on November 15, 2017, Robert read aloud in his office, his hands trembling imperceptibly. Works as a housekeeper in 4 different homes to support her children. Lives in a rented 2-bedroom house on the East Side. The children attend a public school. Medical history indicates that Peter has progressive myopia, requiring specialized ophthalmological follow-up. The report included discrete photographs of the boys leaving school, playing in their small backyard, helping their mother carry grocery bags. In each image, Robert saw traces of himself that he had previously ignored. The way Paul furrowed his brow when focused. The way Danny gestured while speaking, the upright posture of Peter, even though he was the quietest of the 3. "Mr. Anderson?" Carla entered the office with a stack of documents. "The board is waiting for you in the meeting room." 5 minutes, Robert murmured, quickly putting the report in the locked drawer. During the board meeting, Robert struggled to focus on discussions about expansion into the Asian market, but his mind kept drifting back to the East Side house he had seen in the photographs. It was a simple building of light green bricks, with a small iron gate and clothes hanging in the small yard. The stark difference between that reality and his mansion in the Upper East Side made him feel a guilt that grew each day. "Robert, are you with us?" The voice of the board president brought him back to reality. "Sorry, I was reviewing the last quarter's numbers." But he wasn't. He was thinking about how 3 children slept in a small room while he had 8 empty bedrooms in his house. He was imagining Ms. Johnson working in 4 different homes to pay the rent and school supplies, while he spent more on a single meal than she earned in a week. That afternoon, Robert made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going straight home, he drove to the East Side, following the address from the report. He parked discreetly across the street and watched the light green house. It was even smaller than it appeared in the photographs, squeezed between other similar buildings on a narrow, busy street. It was almost 6 in the evening when he saw Ms. Johnson arriving on foot, carrying 2 heavy grocery bags. She looked exhausted, her shoulders hunched, not just from the weight of the groceries, but from years of solitary responsibility. Right behind her came the 3 boys, wearing navy blue school uniforms, animatedly discussing something that had happened in class. Robert rolled down the car window slightly to hear their voices. "Mom, the teacher said that next week we're going to plant beans in a yogurt cup," Peter said enthusiastically, being the most studious of the 3. "Can I bring the project home?" "Of course, my love. We'll find a spot by the window for it to grow." "And can I help take care of it?" Paul asked, always eager to assist. "You all will help. We're a team, remember?" Danny, the most outgoing, bounced alongside his brothers. "Mom, Ms. Concession asked if you could clean her house on Saturday. She said she'll pay $50 extra because it's her daughter's birthday." "Then we'll have to take you there again," Ms. Johnson sighed. "I know you don't like to sit still for so long." "No problem, Mom," the 3 said almost in unison. "We'll behave." Robert watched the family enter the small house, a scene of harmony and love that drastically contrasted with the cold emptiness of his mansion in the Upper East Side. He sat there for more. As he sat for an hour, watching the lights turn on in the house, he imagined the evening routine: homework on the kitchen table, a quick shower because hot water was limited, a simple dinner made with love, stories told before bed, in a room shared by the 3 brothers. The next morning, Robert arrived at work with renewed determination, but not to close new deals. He called Carla for a private conversation. "I want you to research pediatric eye surgeries. The best doctors in New York, specialized clinics, everything." "Sir, is there a family member with vision problems?" Robert hesitated. How could he explain that he had discovered he had a son who needed corrective surgery but couldn't just show up and reveal the truth? "It's for a charity I'm considering supporting." The lie troubled him, but it was necessary for now. He needed time to devise a plan, a way to help without disrupting the delicate balance that Miss Johnson had built to protect the children. During that week, Robert became an expert in pediatric ophthalmology. He discovered that Peter needed surgery to correct progressive myopia that, if left untreated, could result in significant vision loss. The procedure cost the equivalent of 2 years of Ms. Johnson's salary, an impossible amount for a single mother working as a housekeeper. It was then that Robert devised his first paternal gesture, albeit anonymously. Through his contacts in the medical field, he created a scholarship program that would provide free eye surgeries for underprivileged children. Peter Anderson would be the first beneficiary, selected through the public school he attended. "It's kind of strange," Carla commented, when Robert explained the details of the program. "You've never shown interest in children's charity before." "People change, Carla. Maybe it's time to give back to the community." In reality, Robert was experiencing something entirely new, the paternal instinct emerging overwhelmingly after years of dormancy. Every piece of news about the children he could discreetly obtain, through casual conversations with Miss Johnson or observations during his domestic investigations, awakened in him a mix of pride and regret. He learned that Danny was taking guitar lessons from a musician neighbor, that Paul had won a medal in the school math competition, and that Peter was reading 2 books a week at the public library. They were intelligent, well-mannered and loving children, raised with solid values by a mother who had never spoken ill of their absent father. "They sometimes ask about their dad," Miss Johnson had commented one afternoon, unaware she was speaking to the man himself. "I tell them he's a very busy man, working to help many people, and that maybe one day..." The irony of the situation cut Robert like a blade. He was indeed a very busy man, working obsessively, but never to help the people who mattered most. Now, discovering he had 3 brilliant children who dreamed of meeting their father, he felt the overwhelming weight of 8 lost years, first steps he hadn't seen, first words he hadn't heard, feverish nights he hadn't consoled. That Friday, when he got home and found more evidence of the boy's presence, a forgotten crayon on the sofa, a math worksheet with a perfect score left accidentally on the table, Robert made a definitive decision. He could no longer live in this ghost father situation. He needed to find a way to get closer to the children, even if it meant confronting his own fears and the complex situation his absence had created. The first official meeting between Robert Anderson and his children was about to happen, and he had no idea how a man who had built business empires could win the hearts of 3 7-year-old boys who had grown up without knowing he existed. The opportunity Robert had been waiting for came unexpectedly in June, when New York was preparing for the traditional summer barbecues. Ms. Johnson had requested 2 days off, something extremely rare in her 2 years of work at the mansion, nervously explaining that the boys would be participating in a special presentation at school and that she couldn't miss them dancing for the first time. "It's very important for them, Mr. Anderson," she explained, wringing the dish towel in her hands. "They've been rehearsing for weeks, and I promised I'd be there. I know I don't usually ask for time off, but, of course, Miss Johnson. Go be with your children." Robert tried to sound casual, but his heart raced at the possibility that had just emerged. "Which school is the presentation at?" "At the public school on the east side. It's a simple school, sir, but the teachers are very dedicated." Robert mentally noted all the details. This would be his chance to see the children in their natural environment, to observe them interacting with other kids, and perhaps to start understanding how to approach them without causing trauma or confusion. On Thursday afternoon, Robert cancelled an important meeting with Japanese investors, a decision that left Carla speechless, and drove to the east side. The public school was a low, light yellow building with a spacious yard decorated with colourful banners and makeshift stalls for the summer barbecue. The contrast with the elite private schools he knew was striking, but there was something warm about that simple, familiar environment. Robert parked discreetly across the street and watched families arriving for the festivities. Lower middle-class parents, dressed in colourful, country-style clothing, carrying happy, costumed children. There was a genuine joy in the air that he rarely witnessed at social events in his business circle. That was when he saw them for the first time outside their home. Peter, Paul, and Danny walked alongside Miss Johnson, dressed in red plaid shirts that she had clearly sewn by hand. Their jeans were impeccably pressed, and each wore a small straw hat adorned with colourful ribbons. They were animatedly chatting, gesturing and laughing, clearly excited about the presentation. "Mother, do you think we will remember all the steps?" asked Paul, the most perfectionist of the 3. "You all practice so much that you know the dance better than I do," Ms. Johnson smiled, adjusting Danny's hat. "Just have fun and do your best." "What if we mess up?" Peter, always worried, frowned. "Then you laugh and keep dancing. The important thing is to be here together, celebrating." Robert felt emotional at Ms. Johnson's patience and care. She had transformed 3 fatherless boys into confident and happy children, teaching them that love and support were more important than perfection. He discreetly followed the family to the schoolyard, blending in among the other parents. No one recognized him. After all, what reason would the famous businessman Robert Anderson have to be at a public school summer barbecue? He chose a strategic corner, close enough to hear and see everything, but far enough not to be noticed. The performance began with the younger children singing country songs. Robert watched his sons organizing behind the makeshift wooden stage, helping each other adjust their outfits and rehearsing the steps one last time. There was a natural synchronicity among the 3 that went beyond being triplets. They truly supported one another. When it was finally the turn of the second grade class, Robert felt his heart race. The song "Jump the Bonfire" began to play, and the little dancers entered the stage. Peter, Paul, and Danny positioned themselves at the center of the formation, moving with impressive coordination for 7-year-olds. "Look at that," commented a mother next to Robert. "Miss Johnson's triplets are dancing like professionals." "She works so hard to give them the best," replied another woman. "She sews their clothes, helps with their homework, never misses a performance. She's a warrior." Robert absorbed every word, every compliment directed at the woman who was raising his children alone. Throughout the performance, his eyes alternated between the dancing boys and Miss Johnson in the audience, filming with an old cell phone and clapping with tears of pride in her eyes. When the music ended and the children took their final bow, Robert saw Danny looking for Miss Johnson in the audience and waving specifically at her, a radiant smile lighting up his face. Peter and Paul did the same, and the three blew kisses to their mother. It was a scene of pure family love that made Robert realize how much he had lost and how much he could still gain. After the performances, families dispersed to the food stalls. Robert watched from a distance as Miss Johnson bought skewers of meat and corn pudding for the boys, carefully calculating every dollar spent. They shared a single portion of peanut candy among the three, each taking small pieces to make it last longer. It was then that the unexpected happened, changing everything. Danny, running between the stalls with the typical energy of a child after a successful performance, tripped over a loose stone and fell to his knees on the ground. The loud and immediate crying caught everyone's attention, including Robert, who instinctively moved toward the child before even thinking about what he was doing. "My knee!" Danny cried, holding his injured leg as Miss Johnson ran to reach him. Robert arrived first. Without thinking of the consequences, he knelt beside the boy and carefully examined the wound. It was just a scrape, but it was bleeding a little and obviously hurt. "Let me see, champ," Robert said softly, his natural fatherly voice emerging without him realizing it. "It's just a scrape, nothing we can't fix." Danny stopped crying and looked at Robert with curiosity. "Are you a doctor?" "No, but I know about injuries. When I was your age, I used to scrape myself like this." "Robert," Miss Johnson's voice behind him was filled with shock and confusion. "What? How did you—" Robert slowly stood up, still holding Danny's small hand, and turned to face Miss Johnson. Peter and Paul approached, flanking their injured brother, and the three boys looked at the man who had appeared out of nowhere to help them. "I came to see the performance," Robert said, feeling he needed an explanation. "I heard about the school's summer barbecue and decided to check it out." It was half-truth, but Miss Johnson didn't seem to believe it. Her eyes alternated between Robert and the boys, as if she were calculating risks and possibilities. "Thank you for helping Danny," she finally said, her voice formal but trembling. "Come on, boys. Let's go home." "Wait, Mom." Danny still held Robert's hand. "Can you come with us? I want to show him my math trophy." Peter and Paul immediately got excited about the idea. "Yeah, Mom, he seems cool." Robert looked at Miss Johnson, seeing the internal struggle reflected in her eyes. She knew exactly who he was and what his presence there meant. But how to explain to 3 7-year-olds why the kind man who helped Danny couldn't visit them? "Maybe another time," Miss Johnson said carefully. "You must have important commitments." "Actually," Robert heard himself say, "I don't have any commitment more important than getting to know you 3 better." The words came out before he could censor them, filled with a sincerity that surprised even him. There, in the courtyard of a public school, surrounded by the smell of popcorn and hot cider, Robert Anderson had just taken the first official step toward the fatherhood he had lost. Nearly 8 years ago, the drive from the school to Miss Johnson's home on the east side was silent and tense. Robert followed her old white compact car in his BMW, feeling as if he were driving into completely unknown territory. In the car ahead, he could see the silhouettes of the three boys, animatedly gesturing, clearly excited about the unexpected visit from the kind man who had helped Danny. When they reached the narrow street where Miss Johnson lived, Robert carefully parked his car, in the midst of two older popular figures, aware that the contrast was striking. The neighbors on the sidewalk stopped their conversations to watch the man in the expensive suit stepping out of a car that cost more than their houses. "This is it," Miss Johnson said nervously, opening the small iron gate of the light green house. "It's simple, but it's our home." The three boys raced ahead, competing to be the first to show the house to the esteemed visitor. Robert followed them, passing through a tiny but impeccably maintained yard with potted plants lovingly arranged and a clothesline stretched from one side to the other. "Look, Uncle Robert," Danny had improvised the term. "This is our garden. Mom planted chives and parsley, and there are cherry tomatoes over there in the corner," Peter added proudly, pointing to the small tomato plants. "We planted the seeds ourselves." The front door opened directly into a small but cozy living room. Robert had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the low threshold. The space was simple but meticulously arranged: a two-seater sofa with handmade floral covers, an old television on a painted wooden rack, and a small table that clearly served both for meals and homework. "Please have a seat," Miss Johnson offered, picking up some toys scattered on the sofa. "I'll make some coffee." "Don't bother. It's the tradition of the house. Every visitor has coffee with us," Paul explained seriously. "Mom makes the best coffee on the street." Robert sat on the sofa, which creaked gently under his weight, and observed the surroundings. On the walls, there were carefully framed drawings by the children, some photos in simple frames, and a small crucifix. There was no luxury, but there was love in every detail, from the hand-stitched cushions to the smell of cleaning wax mixed with the aroma of home-cooked food. "Uncle Robert, do you want to see our room?" Danny tugged at his hand enthusiastically. "Danny, let the gentleman rest," Miss Johnson called from the kitchen. "It's all right." Robert stood up. "I would love to see the house." The boys' room was even smaller than the living room, but organized with military efficiency. 3 twin beds occupied almost all the space, each with different colored bedspreads, blue, red, and yellow, so that each child could preserve their identity. Between the beds, there was an improvised shelf made from painted wooden crates where books, toys, and notebooks were neatly stacked. "Each one has their own corner," Peter explained, sitting on his blue bed. "Mom said that when we grow up, she will try to rent a bigger house. But I like sleeping close to my brothers," Danny confessed. "At night, when there's thunder, we whisper until the fear passes." Robert noticed the personal details: drawings stuck to the wall, a collection of small cars on the dresser, books piled next to each bed. Paul had more books than toys. Peter kept everything meticulously organized, and Danny had scattered little treasures all around his corner, colorful. Pebbles, stickers, a broken yo-yo that was clearly too precious to be thrown away. "Uncle Robert, look at my trophy." Danny ran to the shelf and grabbed a small golden statuette. "I won it in the school's math competition." "You won it?" Robert examined the trophy with genuine interest. "Congratulations, math is very important." "Are you good at math?" Peter asked, approaching with curiosity. "I use math in my job every day to calculate investments and things like that." "That's cool. Do you work in a bank?" Paul joined the conversation. Robert hesitated. How to explain his profession to 7-year-olds without sounding pretentious or distant? "I work helping companies grow and create more jobs for people." "Like a business superhero," Danny exclaimed, and Robert couldn't help but smile. "Something like that." Miss Johnson appeared at the door of the room carrying a tray with small cups and a homemade cake. "The coffee is ready, and I made a cornbread cake from yesterday." Back in the living room, Robert found himself sitting at the small table, drinking strong and sweet coffee from a delicate porcelain cup, clearly one of the few fine pieces that Miss Johnson owned. The cornbread cake was delicious, moist, and tasted like home, something he hadn't experienced in decades. "It's delightful," he said sincerely. "It's been a long time since I've had homemade cake like this." "Mom is the best cook in the world," the three said almost in unison, making Miss Johnson blush. "You all exaggerate," she murmured, but Robert noticed the pride in her voice. As they chatted, Robert observed the family dynamics. The boys took turns speaking, each respecting the other's turn. When Danny spilled some crumbs, Paul automatically picked them up without anyone asking. Peter, noticing that Robert's cup was empty, offered more coffee with natural politeness. "They are very well-mannered," Robert commented. "We try to follow Grandma's rules," Peter explained. "She always said that manners are the only inheritance no one can take from us." "Grandma?" Robert looked questioningly at Miss Johnson. "My grandmother raised me. She passed away when the boys were 4 years old, but they remember her fondly." "She made the best caramel in the world," Danny sighed nostalgically, "and told stories about when Mom was little." "And taught us to pray before sleeping," Paul added. Robert felt a pang of envy and regret. Those children had grown up with a loving grandmother, with family traditions, with stories that connected the past and present. He, in his privileged but cold childhood, had never experienced that kind of family warmth. "Does Uncle Robert have children?" Danny asked, with the typical innocent curiosity of children. The question caught Robert completely off guard. Miss Johnson stiffened in her chair, clearly also waiting for the answer. How to respond honestly without revealing the truth that was still too complex to explain? "No, not yet," Robert said carefully. "But I always wanted to have kids like you." "Why haven't you had any?" "Yet?" Paul asked. "You're really nice." "Sometimes life doesn't go as we plan," Robert replied, looking directly at Miss Johnson. "Sometimes we miss important opportunities because we're too busy with other things." Miss Johnson lowered her eyes, fully understanding the subliminal message. "But it's never too late to fix mistakes, is it?" Peter, the most serious of the three, asked the question that struck Robert deeply. "We hope not," Robert answered, his voice almost a whisper. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. The boys showed their school notebooks, their latest drawings, and taught Robert to play a card game. They had learned from their classmates. Each moment revealed aspects of their personalities. Peter was strategic and careful, Paul was competitive but fair, Danny was spontaneous and cheerful. When the sun began to set, painting the sky orange through the small window of the room, Robert knew it was time to leave, but something had fundamentally changed inside him. Those 3 children, raised with love and simplicity, had touched a part of his soul he didn't even know existed. "Uncle Robert, will you come back to visit us?" Danny asked at the farewell. Robert looked at Miss Johnson, seeking permission. In her eyes, she hesitated for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "If you want, and if your mother doesn't mind, I would love to come back." "We want you to," the 3 shouted in unison. As he drove back to the mansion on the Upper East Side, Robert carried with him more than memories of a pleasant afternoon. He carried the certainty that he had found something that all his money and success could never buy, a real family, built with true love, where he could finally learn to be not just Robert Anderson, the successful businessman, but Robert, the father he had always meant to be. The days that followed that first visit transformed Robert in a way he didn't fully understand. During meetings at the office, he found himself thinking about the 3 boys and how he could be more present in their lives without causing trauma or confusion. Each night, Returning to his empty mansion on the Upper East Side, the contrast with the small but warm house on the East Side became more painful. It was on a rainy Friday in July that Robert made the most important decision of his life. He arrived home early, finding Miss Johnson preparing dinner in the kitchen, as she always did before leaving. She had become even quieter and more cautious since his visit to her home, clearly trying to process the implications of his involvement with the children. "Miss Johnson!" Robert called, his voice carrying a seriousness she recognized immediately. "We need to have a serious conversation." She stopped chopping vegetables and turned slowly, drying her hands on her apron. "About what, Mr. Anderson?" "About our children." The word "our" hung in the air like a bomb. Miss Johnson paled and leaned against the counter, her legs visibly trembling. It was the first time Robert openly acknowledged fatherhood, even if just between the two of them. "Sir, you don't need to pretend anymore, Miss Johnson. I know. I did a discreet DNA test 3 weeks ago." Robert pulled an envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket. "Peter, Paul, and Danny are my children." Miss Johnson closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if a gigantic weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. When she opened them again, tears were running down her face. "I always knew you would find out one day," she whispered, "especially after I started working here, but I didn't know how, when." Robert stepped closer to her, maintaining a respectful distance, but showing his intention to truly talk, not just confront. "Why did you come to work in my house, Miss Johnson? Why didn't you reach out to me directly?" "Because I was scared," she confessed, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Scared that you would deny it, that you would demand a humiliating DNA test, that you would try to take the boys away from me. They are all I have in the world. And you thought that by working here, I could observe what kind of man you had become, see if you would be capable of loving 3 children who grew up without you." Her voice trembled. "And part of me secretly hoped you would notice, that you would recognize something in them." Robert felt the weight of 8 years of lost fatherhood crashing down on him. "Miss Johnson, I'm so sorry. If I had known..." "You would have known if you had given me 5 minutes to explain before you traveled to the United States," she interrupted, a hint of old bitterness emerging. "If you had returned at least one of my calls." "You're right, I was, a work-obsessed man who didn't know how to value what really matters." Robert ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability for him. "But I want to change that. I want to be their father, Miss Johnson. I want to be present." "And you think it's that simple?" Her voice rose slightly. "They are 7 years old, Robert. 7 years growing up without a father, creating fantasies about who he could be. How are we going to explain that? Uncle Robert, who appeared out of nowhere, is actually the father they always wanted to know." The question was valid and terrifying. Robert had conquered boardrooms filled with seasoned executives, but the idea of explaining to 3 children why he had been absent from their lives left him in a panic. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never been a father before. I don't even know where to start." "Being a father doesn't start when the child is born, Robert. It starts when you decide that you will be present no matter what." Miss Johnson turned back to the counter, resuming the preparation of dinner with mechanical movements. "They need stability, security, not someone who can disappear again when business becomes more important." "That won't happen." "How can you guarantee that? Your whole life has been built around work. You don't know any other way to live." Robert fell silent for a long moment, processing the painful truth of Miss Johnson's words. She was right. He didn't know how to balance fatherhood with his business responsibilities, but the certainty that he wanted to learn was stronger than any fear. "Then teach me," he finally said. "Teach me to be their father." Miss Johnson stopped chopping the vegetables and looked at him in surprise. "What? You managed to raise them alone, turning them into amazing, polite, loving children. Clearly, you know something about parenting that I need to learn." Robert took a step closer. "Teach me how to be present, how to be important in their lives without destroying what you've built." "Robert, I know I can't make up for 8 lost years. I know I don't deserve their forgiveness or yours, but I want to try. I want to be worthy of being their father." Miss Johnson studied him for a long moment, searching for signs of sincerity on his face. "Are you serious? Are you willing to rearrange your entire life for 3 children you barely know?" "They are my children, Miss Johnson, and getting to know them was like waking up from a dream or a nightmare." Robert struggled to find the right words. "For the first time in my life, I found something more important than money or business. They will ask difficult questions. They will want to know where you've been, why you weren't there when they were born, why their mother raised them alone. And I will answer with the truth, that I made a terrible mistake, that I was so focused on building an empire that I forgot to build a family." Robert paused. "And that now I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that." Miss Johnson remained silent for several minutes, clearly struggling with conflicting feelings. Finally, she sighed and turned to him. "If we are going to do this, we will do it right. I don't want them to be just a weekend project for you. If you're going to be their father, it will be for real." "What does that mean?" "It means being present at school meetings, knowing their friends, taking them to the doctor when they're sick. It means helping with homework, teaching values, giving love and discipline in the right measure." Miss Johnson crossed her arms. "It means they come first, always, before any business, any trip, any opportunity to make more money." "I understand. And it means respecting the place I've built in their lives. I am their mother, Robert. I'm the one who took care of them when they were sick, who comforted them when they had nightmares, who taught them how to tie their shoes and brush their teeth. You can be their father, but you can't try to erase my importance. I would never do that. You are an amazing mother. They are lucky to have you." Ms. Johnson nodded slowly. "Then let's talk to them, but let's do it together as partners in their upbringing. And if you change your mind, if you decide it's too complicated or interferes too much with your business life, let me know beforehand. I don't want them to go through the pain of losing their father twice. That won't happen. We hope it won't." Miss Johnson went back to preparing dinner. "How about Saturday? You can come for lunch with us, spend the afternoon, and at the end of the day, we'll talk to them." Robert felt a mix of terror and anticipation. In 2 days, his life would change completely. In 2 days, he would stop being just Robert Anderson, the successful businessman, to become Robert, the father of Peter, Paul, and Danny. "Saturday, then," he agreed, his voice almost inaudible. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He stayed in the office of his mansion, looking at photos of the boys he had discreetly printed, imagining what it would be like to finally say, "My son," out loud. For the first time in his adult life, Robert Anderson was about to face the most important and terrifying challenge of his existence: being a real father. Saturday dawned, with a typical grey winter sky, but for Robert, the world seemed brighter than ever. He woke up at 6 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual, with a mix of anxiety and anticipation he had never felt before any important business meeting. Today would be the day he finally revealed himself as a father to Peter, Paul, and Danny. He spent over an hour choosing what to wear, alternating between expensive suits that might intimidate the children and casual clothes that didn't match his personality. Finally, he opted for a light blue dress shirt without a tie and dark chinos, formal enough to show respect for the occasion, but casual enough to seem approachable. "Carla," he called his secretary, even though it was Saturday, "I need you to cancel everything on my schedule for next week that isn't absolutely essential." Sir? Is there a crisis at the company? No, it's about a new priority in my life. On the way to the East Side, Robert stopped at an upscale toy store in the Upper East Side and felt lost among the options. He wanted to bring gifts for the boys, but he didn't know what would be appropriate. He didn't want to seem like he was trying to buy their affection, but he also wanted to show some love in some way. "Can I help you?" asked a kind saleswoman. "I need gifts for 3 7-year-old boys, triplets, but it's complicated." "What kind of complicated?" Robert hesitated. "I'm revealing myself as their father today. It's the first time." The saleswoman smiled understandingly. "In that case, nothing too expensive or extravagant, something that shows you've paid attention to what they like." Following her advice, Robert chose 3 simple yet meaningful gifts: an adventure book set for Peter, a science experiment kit for Paul, and a collection of small cars for Danny. They were gifts that showed he had observed each child's individual personalities. He arrived at Miss Johnson's East Side home promptly at noon, carrying the gifts as Robert stood at the door. His heart raced as if it might explode. Miss Johnson greeted him, wearing a simple but beautiful dress, clearly having dressed up especially for the occasion. "How are you?" she asked softly. "Terrified," Robert admitted. "And you?" "Me too. But it's for their own good." The 3 boys ran to greet him as soon as he entered, all talking at once about things that had happened during the week. Robert knelt down to their level, a technique he had read about in an article on communicating with children during his late-night research. "Uncle Robert, we made Play-Doh at school," Danny exclaimed excitedly. "And I got an A on my English test," Peter added proudly. "And Paul helped a new kid in our class who was being teased," Danny finished. Robert felt a wave of paternal pride that surprised him with its intensity. "You guys are really special, did you know that?" During lunch, a delicious roasted chicken that Miss Johnson had prepared with special care, Robert observed every gesture, every word from the boys. The way Peter helped Paul reach the salad, how Danny told jokes to make everyone laugh, how the 3 automatically helped set the table without anyone asking. "Do you always help each other like this?" Robert asked. "Always," the 3 replied in unison. "Mom taught us that family is a team," Paul explained. "In a team, everyone helps everyone. And if one gets hurt, everyone feels the pain," Peter added philosophically. "And when one is happy, everyone is happy," Danny concluded, clapping his hands. Robert looked at Miss Johnson, who smiled proudly at the values she had instilled in her children. It was impressive how she had raised 3 little humans, so united and caring, even while facing the challenges of being a single mother. After lunch, Robert handed out the gifts. The boys' reactions were better than he could have hoped, not just for the genuine joy they showed, but for the polite way they thanked him and asked if they could open them. "Mom, look, adventure books." Peter flipped through the volumes with shining eyes. "And chemistry kits. Can I do it, Mum? Please?" Paul held the kit as if it were a treasure. "New toy cars. Thank you, Uncle Robert." Danny had already taken one of the cars out of the packaging and was making it zoom across the table. "How did you know exactly what each of us likes?" Peter asked curiously. "Because I paid attention to you," Robert answered honestly. "When we really care about someone, we pay attention to the details that make that person happy." "Do you really like us?" Danny stopped playing and looked directly into Robert's eyes. "Very much. More than I can explain." It was then that Miss Johnson made the agreed signal. "Boys, sit here on the couch. Uncle Robert and I have something very important to talk to you about." The 3 settled onto the small couch, looking expectantly between Robert and Miss Johnson. Robert felt his mouth dry and his heart race even faster. This was the moment that would change everything. "You know that you've always asked questions about your dad," Miss Johnson began gently. "Yeah," Peter nodded. You always said he was an important and busy man, and that maybe one day we would meet him, Paul added. Well, Miss Johnson took a deep breath. That day has come. The three boys looked around the room as if expecting an unknown man to walk through the door. Where is he? Danny asked. Robert felt it was his turn. With his voice trembling with emotion, he said the words he had rehearsed hundreds of times during the week. I'm right here in front of you. The silence that followed was deafening, the three pairs of identical eyes fixed on Robert, processing the information. Peter frowned. Paul slightly opened his mouth, and Danny tilted his head to the side, as he always did when he was confused. Uncle Robert is our dad? Peter finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. Yes, Robert replied, feeling tears burn in his eyes. I'm your dad, and I'm so sorry for taking so long to be here. With you. Paul was the first to react. But why weren't you here when we were babies? Because I made a very big mistake, Robert explained, choosing each word carefully. I was so worried about work that I didn't realize I had the most important thing in the world right here, you three. You didn't know we existed, Danny asked, his innocence making the question even more painful. Robert looked at Miss Johnson, who nodded encouragingly. I knew, but I was confused and scared. I didn't know how to be a good dad, so I ran away, and that was the wrongest thing I've ever done in my life. And now, Peter, always the most serious, asked the crucial question. Are you going to run away again? Never again, Robert said with all the conviction he possessed. If you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the best dad I can be for you. The boys looked at each other, communicating in the silent way only triplets can. Finally, Danny got up from the couch and walked over to Robert. Can I give you a hug? Dad? The word dad, coming from his son's lips, was like an explosion of joy in Robert's chest. He knelt down and opened his arms, and Danny threw himself into them with all the strength of his 7 years. Seconds later, Peter and Paul joined the hug, creating a moment that Robert knew he would remember for the rest of his life. We have a real dad now, Paul murmured against Robert's chest. You always have, Robert replied, his voice choked. I just took too long to show up. When they finally separated, the three boys had tears in their eyes, but were smiling. Robert was also crying. For the first time in decades, he was crying tears of pure joy. Does this mean you're going to live with us now? Danny asked hopefully. Robert looked for Miss Johnson, who smiled and shook her head negatively. They had talked about it. It would be too much change at once. For now, I will visit you whenever I can, Robert explained, and you can come to my house on weekends if you want. We'll take it slow, learning to be a family. A real family? Peter asked. The most real family there is, Robert confirmed, looking at Miss Johnson with infinite gratitude. You, me, and Mom together. At that moment, in the small living room of a humble home on the east side, Robert Anderson finally discovered what it meant to be truly rich, and for the first time in his life, he was absolutely certain that he was exactly where he was meant to be. 6 months after the revelation that changed everything, Robert Anderson was sitting on the floor of the living room of his mansion in the Upper East Side, helping Danny assemble a 1,000-piece puzzle while Peter read aloud an adventure book and Paul enthusiastically explained a volcano experiment they had done at school. It was a scene he had never imagined possible in his previously quiet and formal home. The transformation had not been easy or immediate. The first months were filled with painful adjustments and surprising discoveries. Robert had to learn to completely reorganize his life, delegating responsibilities at the office to be present for his children's important moments. Carla, his secretary, even questioned whether he was going through some kind of existential crisis when he began to refuse meetings to attend the boys' school presentations. Mr. Anderson, she had said, On a Monday in August, the Japanese are insisting on an in-person meeting, and you scheduled it for Thursday afternoon, but I noted here that it's the day of the school science fair. Reschedule for Friday morning, Robert replied without hesitation. The science fair is a priority. Carla looked at him as if he had grown a second head, but she complied. Gradually, she and the entire company team began to realize that Robert had found something that motivated him more than quarterly profits. The biggest change, however, happened in the dynamic between Robert and Ms. Johnson. They had to learn to be partners in raising the children, overcoming years of hurt and misunderstandings. At first, Ms. Johnson maintained a defensive posture, always alert for signs that Robert might try to take complete control or, worse, disappear again. "Miss Johnson," Robert had said one September afternoon, after a school meeting where he had finally met the boys' teachers, "I want you to stop working as a housekeeper. I want you to focus solely on our children." The proposal caught her completely off guard. "Robert, I can't just stop working. I have bills to pay, responsibilities." "I know, that's why I'm proposing that you accept a monthly allowance to take care of the house and the kids, not as an employee, but as a partner in raising them." Ms. Johnson took 2 weeks to accept the proposal, fearing that it could be interpreted as financial dependency or worse, as a way for Robert to exert control over her. But when she realized that he genuinely wanted her to have more time and peace to dedicate to the children, she accepted with gratitude. Weekends became sacred for Robert. Every Friday after work he would drive to the east side to pick up the 3 boys who would spend Saturday and Sunday at the mansion in the Upper East Side. At first, the children were intimidated by the size and luxury of the house, but Robert made a point of adapting it for them. He transformed one of the empty rooms into a boys' room, complete with 3 beds, a study area, and shelves filled with books and toys. He hired a swimming instructor to teach the triplets how to swim in the pool that had previously served only as decoration. He started cooking on Sundays, something he hadn't done in 20 years, preparing simple dishes that the children liked. "Dad, the pasta is a little sticky," Paul diplomatically commented during a Sunday lunch. "It's because I'm still learning to cook," Robert admitted, laughing at himself. "Can you teach me some recipes that Mom makes?" "Of course, we know how to make scrambled eggs and grilled cheese sandwiches," Danny eagerly offered. These small, everyday interactions taught Robert more about fatherhood than any book could. He learned that being a dad meant being present not just for special moments, but mainly for ordinary ones, helping with homework, mediating sibling fights, comforting nightmares, celebrating small victories. His relationship with each child developed uniquely. Peter, the most introspective, enjoyed discussing books and asking deep questions about life. Paul loved scientific experiments and logical challenges, always finding in Robert a partner for his crazy projects. Danny, the most affectionate, simply liked being around, sharing stories from school or asking for hugs when he was tired. "Dad," Peter had asked one October afternoon while they were doing their math homework together, "do you regret not being here when we were babies?" The question, asked with the typical sincerity of a child, hit Robert hard. "Every day, son, every day I regret it. But you're here now," Peter observed pragmatically. "And that's what matters, right? That's what matters most in the world." In November, during the first parent meeting that Robert officially attended, he felt proud in a completely new way. The teachers spoke about how the 3 boys were exemplary students, polite and united, and Robert realized that this was a reflection of the incredible work that Ms. Johnson had done alone for so many years. "Mr. Anderson," said Peter's teacher, "it's remarkable how the children have flourished even more since you became involved. Peter in particular is more confident and participative." "They all are," added the educational coordinator. "It's beautiful to see a family coming together like this." Robert exchanged a glance with Ms. Johnson, who smiled proudly. They were truly managing to form a family, even if it didn't follow the traditional model. Christmas 2025 was the first that Robert truly celebrated in decades. Instead of the formal dinners and corporate events he used to attend, he spent Christmas Eve at Miss Johnson's house in the East Side, helping her prepare dinner and wrapping gifts until the early hours of the morning. "Dad, do you know how to ride a bike?" Danny asked, watching Robert struggle with the instructions for the gift he had bought. "Apparently not," Robert laughed, surrounded by pieces and screws. "How about we learn together tomorrow morning?" "Cool! It can be our Christmas project." On the morning of the 25th, Robert woke up to the sound of 3 children running through the house, shouting that Santa Claus had come. Seeing their genuine joy as they discovered the presents, not just the ones he had given, but also the little treats that Ms. Johnson had managed to buy with her allowance, made Robert understand the true meaning of Christmas. "Thank you, Dad." The 3 hugged him simultaneously, and Robert felt that he was finally living what truly mattered. In early February 2026, when a year had passed since Robert began working to rebuild his relationship with his children, he made a definitive decision. He called a family meeting, a concept he had learned to value, and made a proposal that had been maturing in his mind for months. "I want you all to move to the Upper East Side," he announced, observing Miss Johnson's and the boys' reactions. "All of you, as a real family." The silence that followed was tense. Miss Johnson looked at him with a mix of surprise and caution. "Robert, not as a housekeeper," he hurried to clarify. As the mother of my children, as my partner in raising them. We can keep separate rooms, establish our own dynamic, but I want us to be a complete family." The boys looked at their mother with expectation. It was obvious that the idea excited them, but they respected her decision. "Are you sure?" Miss Johnson asked. "It's a very big change for all of us. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Peter, always the wisest, asked the question everyone was thinking. "What if it doesn't work out? What if we fight a lot or something?" Robert smiled at his son. "Then we talk, apologize when we're wrong, and try to be better the next day. That's what families do, right?" "That's what families do," Ms. Johnson softly repeated, finally smiling. "Then, let's try." 3 months later, the mansion in the Upper East Side had become unrecognizably warm and noisy. There were small sneakers scattered at the entrance, drawings stuck on the refrigerator, laughter echoing through the once silent hallways. Robert had learned to be not just a present father, but a true partner for Ms. Johnson, sharing responsibilities and decisions about the children. It wasn't perfect. There were discussions about boundaries, negotiations about punishments, moments of stress when everyone tested the new family limits. But it was real, it was genuine, and it was exactly what Robert had always sought without knowing. On a sunny afternoon in May, Robert was in his home office when Danny burst in, followed by Peter and Paul. "Dad, come see what we planted in the garden." Danny pulled at his hand. Robert glanced at the computer screen, where an important presentation on international expansion awaited his attention. 2 years ago, this presentation would have been his absolute priority. Today, he didn't hesitate. "Sure, let's check out that planting." In the garden, the 3 boys proudly showed off a small garden they had created with Ms. Johnson's help. There were tomatoes, lettuce, green onions, and even some colorful flower seedlings. "We did it all by ourselves," Paul explained. "Well, Mom helped a little. And when the tomatoes grow, we'll make a special sauce for the pasta," Peter added. Robert knelt to examine the little plants, feeling a wave of paternal pride that never got old. "You guys are amazing. I'm going to be the proudest dad in the world eating those tomatoes." "Dad," Danny leaned closer and whispered conspiratorially, "are you happy now?" The question, posed with the typical innocence of a nearly 8-year-old, touched Robert deeply. He looked around, at his children, dirty but radiant with joy, at Miss Johnson watching him from the kitchen window with a loving smile, at the house that had finally become a home. "I'm the happiest man in the world, my son." And for the first time in his life, Robert Anderson knew that this was completely true. He had discovered that true success was not measured in bank figures or business empires, but in sincere hugs, morning laughter, and the feeling of being unconditionally loved by three little beings who called him Dad. The mansion in the Upper East Side, once a mausoleum of solitude disguised as success, had transformed into what Robert had always dreamed of without knowing, a home filled with love, noise, and life. And Robert knew that no matter what other empires he might still build or conquer, nothing would ever be more valuable than the family he had finally found or rediscovered in his own home. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment "I watched until here" and leave your opinion about this story. And don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very exciting.